Hello there, this is Coden,
And this is Cassia.
and welcome to the Ebonhawk, a podcast discussing Star Wars news and Knights of the Old Republic. Today we'll discuss Disney Plus' upcoming Bad Batch series and analyze what the beginning of a KOTOR film could look like. So, spoiler alert for Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. This is episode 30, and this is where the title crawl begins. So the first thing we're going to go over, we have some listener questions to hit up first. So the first one comes from the Senate.squad, and they ask, how did we meet?
We met in high school, so we were just both big Star Wars fans.
Yep, we found out we were big Star Wars fans, and we became friends. All right, Mysteries of the Force asks, what is the process of healing a red kyber crystal? I know Ahsoka did it, but what was the process?
Kyber crystals, from my understanding, aren't quite sentient, but they are aligned with the Force. In the new canon, when a Darksider goes to the dark side, they want a red blade, so they bleed it. So they will take an existing crystal. In the new canon, red crystals don't exist, so they have to corrupt a crystal that's aligned with the light side, like a blue or green crystal typically, and they will turn it to the dark side. And when that happens, it bleeds it, giving it that red hue. So when Ahsoka killed an Inquisitor, she took his crystals and aligned them back to the light side, giving them a white color. That's what I was able to find, and I think they just wanted to give Ahsoka a new color.
I don't know, this is one of the weird, updated lore pieces of Star Wars that I just kind of prefer synthetic versus non-synthetic, but
yeah, I mean, possibly synthetic could still exist. It just may be Darksiders and Sith like bleeding a crystal. So yeah.
yeah, I do like kind of the Sith rite of passage where in order to get your crystal you have to take it from a fallen Jedi, and then I guess they just murder a Jedi with it and then it bleeds the crystal or whatever. That makes sense in a Sith perspective, but I don't know, it kind of Harry Potterifies Star Wars, and I'd just rather, this
Yeah.
crystal is manufactured and this crystal was earned through a Force trial.
I mean, that's what I kind of thought when I heard it too. I'm like, that sounds like Harry Potter. So I kind of wonder if Disney did that so then they could kind of turn Galaxy's Edge a little bit into an Ollivanders,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
All right, so we're going to take just a quick ad break. Our next question comes from Jedi Immortal. If KOTOR became full-on canon and had its movie, how would it affect the already canon version of Darth Bane? They only showed him once in the Clone Wars and established his rule of two, but did not explore anything else, leaving the door wide open for Legends to remain intact in canon or not.
So KOTOR falls at 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, and Darth Bane is 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. So they really, if one is canon, they don't really interact that much. What is interesting, though, is in the Mortis arc, Darth Bane was going to make an appearance along with Darth Revan, but then that was cut because Darksiders weren't meant to survive death. They were going to interact with the sun, but then that scene was nixed. You can see that deleted scene. Darth Bane did appear in, season 6 of the Clone Wars, though. And basically it's the same, but he kind of had an appearance that made him look a little bit more like a Spanish conquistador. So I think if KOTOR were canon, it really wouldn't impact Darth Bane that much. And the canon version of the Clone Wars, Darth Bane, I don't think would impact the Legends that much if they wanted to delve into those stories.
Yeah, I think even in the Legend lore, the Sith go from being like a large organized empire to that traditional rule of two. So there is like a hard transition point between like having an army of Sith warriors to just the two. And so
Yeah.
like yeah, I don't think it's disruptive at all, and it's something that could easily be worked in.
Yeah, I mean, George Lucas was the one who came up with Darth Bane, so I think it works. And then in our last episode 29, we missed this comment from Astrodroid. He was responding to a question about what future Star Wars music should sound like, and he said, I think it has to remain in classical scores, but I'd like new themes. Maybe something could be co-scored by John Williams with a younger composer, and then sort of handed over to the next generation. What do you think of that comment, Coden?
I'd have to agree. I like the classical sound and feel of the Star Wars music, but I do like hearing new melodies and themes. And so I would want just the same overall sound but new melodies to explore for Star Wars music.
Yeah, I kind of wish that's what they would have done with the sequel trilogy, because with John Williams, I think he pretty much established what Star Wars sounded like with the original trilogy, but then when he went to the prequel trilogy, he was being experimental. And I mean, if you listen to The Phantom Menace, you have the Duel of the Fates, which was like the first choral sound in Star Wars, and you have more percussive sounds, and I think he really threw everything in the kitchen sink into Revenge of the Sith. With the sequel trilogy, I kind of just remember Kylo Ren's theme and Rey's theme, and that's about it off the top of my head. I mean, it all sounds nice, but it just wasn't quite as memorable.
Yeah, I think the music went from being defined in full pieces to just kind of being like these little musical quips here and there. And there were a couple major themes in the new trilogy with Rey and Kylo, but everything else just kind of seemed like here's a fraction of the Force theme, and then we'll kind of spin it off, and then here's a fraction of the Skywalker theme, and then we'll just spin it off, and it just kind of kept doing that, and it's especially evident in Rogue One, which is completely different, but it was also present in the sequel trilogy as well.
So thank you for your comment, Astrodroid.
All right, so we're going to take just a quick ad break.
All right, we just wanted to take a moment to thank June B for his Apple podcast review. He gave us 5 stars. He said, this is the best podcast. I love it. You should all listen to this. So thank you. Subscriptions and reviews help us out because we are a simple podcast just trying to make our way in the universe.
Our next topic, we're going to be talking about the Bad Batch announcement. Let's see, we pulled this article from Variety, and it's titled Star Wars Animated Series, The Bad Batch Ordered at Disney+.
We decided to cover this because Respect Star Wars asked us, what are your thoughts on the Bad Batch announcement?
So it's going to be a new animated series. In my analysis is that it's kind of like the sequel or the next step of the Clone Wars, but it's going to be focused around the cast of the Bad Batch. It is animated, so at first, when the announcement first came out, it kind of sounded like it was going to be live action, but it is animated and probably in the same style as the last Clone Wars season. So it's slated to launch on Disney Plus. They haven't come out with like a hard date yet, but they have said 2021, and it's supposed to take place kind of the aftermath of the Clone War. So I guess we'll get to see if they'll be used hunting Jedi or if it's just going to be a lot of droid cleanup or whatever, what happens next.
When I was watching the Bad Batch arc and then Order 66 was executed in the Siege of Mandalore arc, it was just at the back of my mind. I'm like, I wonder if the Bad Batch executed Order 66, because if they did, like, they would execute it so hard, you know? But it would be kind of interesting to kind of have a new group of clones with Echo, who we are familiar with, but it's kind of like you have like superheroes in the Star Wars universe that can be interesting, and it just kind of like the transition from Republic to Empire could be compelling to see their journey, finding their place in the universe. Is there a place for clones? They're special, but like the Empire doesn't really care about people being special at the end of the day, you know?
These clones were kind of set up as defective, and so like each one has like a major focus on like one of the Jango Fett traits, right? Like you have Wrecker, who's just like the team muscle, and you got one that's like the team brains, and just go down the list. One's a marksman. Yeah, I don't know. It's possible that because they're defective, maybe that inhibitor chip made canon by Disney is maybe that was defective. Maybe it wasn't. So I guess we'll
Well,
find
actually,
out.
the inhibitor chip came from George, because he was heavily involved in the Clone Wars.
Oh, I kind of thought it was everybody just made that choice on their own. I think it'll be a good kid show. We'll see. I might
Yeah.
check in on it to see if it's any good outside of kind of our outside review.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like it'll be a good spin-off from the Clone Wars. Disney definitely is looking for more Disney Plus content, especially Star Wars. And then since it's animated, like you don't have to have actors filming, and with things as they are right now, like it'll be interesting to see if we still get Mandalorian season 3 next year. But the team behind it, it looks like Dave Filoni will executive produce, and then Athena Portillo, Brad Rao, and Jennifer Corbett will also executive produce, and Carrie Beck will also be a co-executive producer, and Josh Rhimes will produce. So it seems like a good team behind the series. So I just wonder if it'll be a multiple season show like Clone Wars or Rebels. It'll be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean we're getting pretty crowded with Disney Plus 2021. So like either we're gonna have a really awesome 2021, or we're just seeing a lot of dates kind of push in advance due to the global pandemic, and and maybe that's just like a temporary slate. Hopefully we do have a busy year next year, because there's other things like the Kenobi series, the Cassian Andor series, all sorts of things. So
Yeah. The Cassian Andor show could be like Mission Impossible, but in Star Wars, where the emphasis is kind of like on the team, kind of, and espionage, and doing different things in each episode. I think that could be pretty fun.
yeah, I think it could be pretty good too. I mean, I think it could be a little similar to some of like the Marvel TV shows, but it's covering a character that is really interesting, and then in a period of Star Wars that's also really fun to explore as well. So that one, both that and the Kenobi show have some pretty big promise, I think. So just kind of follow up with this article. Ironic Designs had asked us: Varys and Squad hunt down Luminara, clone civil war on Camino, clone colonies to retire on, and the genocide on Geonosis. So one of these items brought up by Ironic Designs, the clone civil war on Camino, this is something that's actually brought up in Star Wars Battlefront 2, old school Star Wars Battlefront 2, not the new one. But that would be something really, well, kind of fun to see and explore, is just kind of what happens with the clone facilities there, and just that transition from the Republic to the Empire. What thoughts do you have, Cassia?
I definitely thought we were going to see more of Barriss by now. I thought she was going to be the second sister in Jedi Fallen Order, but then that, of course, was Trilla Siduri. It would be interesting to see Barriss handled, because there's kind of just a big question mark on her story. So I'm kind of surprised they didn't just like kill her off in Clone Wars if they weren't going to do something. So maybe they could finally answer that, and maybe she was the one that captured her master Luminara Unduli that you see in Star Wars Rebels. It would be interesting to see the clone civil war on Camino. Just kind of see brothers, or like maybe they could play it like brothers versus stepbrothers, created for different purposes.
That's kind of how that, I mean, in that old Battlefront game, how it kind of goes down is you as kind of the new Death Squadron, you invade Camino to wipe out the clone facilities, because they're kind of seen as opposition and competition at that point. Camino is one of my favorite Star Wars locations, just visually, and so I'd like to see another take of that place again.
And then clone colonies to retire on. I don't really see the Empire treating their clones that nicely. Because you kind of get the feeling the Empire doesn't really see clones or cyborgs or aliens as like people. So I think they kind of just would see clones as kind of expendable. Like they serve their purpose, now they're kind of useless. But it would be interesting to see what they do with clones who have outlived their usefulness, if there's anything good to come from that. Genocide on Geonosis, they kind of hinted at that in, I think, the Rogue One prequel book and Star Wars Rebels. That could be pretty dark, but I think even though Star Wars is kind of like a kid's, story, that I think kids can handle learning about genocide.
Again, it's just one of those pieces in that time period that could be explored, I think.
So there's a lot to explore, I think, like in between like Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And I think linking it to Clone Wars makes it a bit more interesting for me.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to see with the Clone Wars was just more of the rebellion movement, which we didn't get to see because it was focused a lot on Ahsoka. But I would have liked to see more of the birth of the rebellion with like Mom Mothma and Bail Organa and them. All right, well, let's take just another quick break and we'll be back with our final topic.
We're going to be discussing how would we start out a Knights of the Old Republic film. And to discuss that, I think we have to start back at the beginning a bit. A New Hope has one of the most iconic film openings of all time. And how it started is with the 20th Century Fox fanfare, which is something I kind of find lacking in the new Star Wars movies, because the main theme is in the same key as the fanfare, so it's kind of like in Star Wars Inception, And then I think we take for granted, like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. A lot of people think like Star Wars is in the future, but it's in a galaxy far, far away, and it's a long time ago. It's like saying once upon a time. And then, boom, Star Wars. Then you have the title crawl. And just a fun fact with the title crawl is that only even-numbered Star Wars films are meant to have capitalizations. 7 and 9 broke that rule. But with A New Hope, the first thing you see are 2 moons over a desert planet. And then you see a small rebel ship being chased by a massive, like, if we're talking in nautical terms, it would be like a massive man-of-war pursuing like a small rebel ship, And it's probably one of the best opening shots in Star Wars and in cinema, because it shows you the stakes, like this rebel ship is trying to get away, but then just the massive scale, because that ship just keeps on going. For me, like, when we're talking Star Wars openings, like only episodes 2 and 3 compare to episode 4. What other Star Wars openings do you like, Coden?
I think the Phantom Menace kind of opens up with more of like a mystery opening where you're starting the new trilogy with a lot of questions, and I think it does a good job like getting that started. But yeah, I think as far as the biggest visual ones, it does lack compared to Attack of the Clones, A New Hope, and just about the rest of them. Even Return of the Jedi is a little bit minimal, but it's mainly because it's just kind of it's introducing you to something you've already seen before, which is the second Death Star, and because of distance and things, you don't really get this sense of scale and size until they attack it at the end of the movie. But one of my favorite openings doesn't actually happen until later in the film of Empire Strikes Back, because you have Yeah, the very opening of Empire Strikes Back, where you're just seeing the Star Destroyer sending out probes, and then it cuts you to Hoth, and then it goes back to the Empire, and that's where it has kind of like the big opening where you're seeing the Star Destroyer getting a shadow cast over it, and then you see the Super Star Destroyer. That's like one of like my favorite scenes of the original trilogy is just how they introduce this giant war machine.
Yeah. But it's interesting, like Star Wars, you always start in space. I mean, it's putting the star in Star Wars.
It'd be so weird if you had a Star Wars movie that started on just the movie opens up and you're sitting on Tatooine. That'd be really odd for Star Wars.
Yeah, so the opening shot, you kind of are just wondering, are the rebels okay? And then a small scale battle takes place, and the odds are not in the rebels' favor. And George Lucas was trying to harken back to the Akira Kurosawa film that he loved so much, The Hidden Fortress, because he just thrusts you into the action, and the viewer just has to figure out what's happening on their own. And rather than following Princess Leia or Vader throughout the film, you're following C-3PO and R2-D2. So that kind of made it different and fresh. And then you kind of contrast it like with the game's opening. We've kind of talked about that in episode 6 of The Ebon Hawk. But it starts with this opening crawl. And it says, 4,000 years before the rise of the Galactic Empire, the Republic verges on collapse. Darth Malak, last surviving apprentice of the Dark Lord Revan, has unleashed an invincible Sith armada upon an unsuspecting galaxy. Crushing all resistance, Malak's war of conquest has left the Jedi Order scattered and vulnerable as countless knights fall in battle, and many more swear allegiance to the new Sith Master. In the skies above the Outer Rim world of Terrace, a Jedi battle fleet engages the forces of Darth Malak in a desperate effort to halt the Sith's galactic domination. So would you keep that same title crawl if you were to make a movie?
I'd probably like mix some things up a little bit. This reminds me of the Rise of Skywalker opening, where it's just like boom, introduce you to the main villain in the title crawl. Like I think I would rather be introduced to the villain outside of the title crawl. And so I'd probably just maybe condense it a little bit, kind of reword kind of how this opens up, but still explain how we got to the opening scene that we're about to see, which is that battle over Terrace.
I think I am okay for the most part with that title crawl. I would just take out the 4,000 years before, because I think a successful ad campaign should just inform the audience that this is going to be before, and visually the film should just feel different, you know?
Yeah, it's something that we don't need to be told exactly how long ago it was. We should be able to just pick that up when the film gets going.
And for me, I don't mind hearing about Darth Malak, because it's one thing just to kind of know who the villain is, but it's a completely different thing to like be like, yeah, we're resurrecting Palpatine because he's back. We're not going to explain it, but just deal with it in the title crawl, you know? But I do like that you kind of hear the names Darth Malak, and then Darth Revan is also a question. And then that Jedi and Sith are fighting against one another, and that a lot of Jedi are falling to the dark side. And then I think I would like a mention of Bastila and Karth, that they are the ones above Terrace.
I think that the biggest adjustments, because I do agree with Karth and Bastila is part of the prologue text scroll, but instead of saying Darth Malak and Darth Revan, they would have kept it to maybe just Darth Revan, because that introduces a villain that we're not going to see for a while, and so it's just a character name in the back of our mind that we're informed about, but it's not something that we're going to really like dive into until later.
But it does seem like when you're playing the game, Darth Revan gets a lot of mentions in dialogue and like the loading screen. I was kind of like, Darth Revan's dead. Like, why are we talking about him? And then we're having visions about him. I'm kind of like, what? Because even though I kind of knew the twist, I'm like, no, they're not going to do that. Like, my friend was lying. And then it's like, oh, that actually was the twist the whole time. So maybe they don't have to mention it in the title crawl, but it would be interesting. Like, you kind of have to weave him in, or else it just comes out of nowhere. But
Yeah, I was
before...
like, I think Revan for sure. Malik, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be interesting to see how they do it. But before the title crawl even happens in the game, you choose your class and gender and what you're going to look like and what your stats are. What do you think, like, Revan should be named? Because I would always, like, come across people who are like, I did my first name and then, like, a special last name on par with, like, Skywalker and Solo, like special hero as the last name. And I'm like, I think a made-up name, like made-up first and last name would work better. What about you?
This is coming from the guy that if you ever encounter a character in the video game world by the name of Coden Bond, that's me. So, I mean, I did the same thing. I didn't really get creative with naming Revan. But, I mean, I would like to have some Star Wars pseudo name for him that ends up putting together the 2 and 2 of, oh, this person is Darth Revan.
Like an anagram, like it's like mixed up, like I am Lord Voldemort is like Tom Marvolo Riddle or something.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a huge bummer if the guy's name was, like Jeff Star-Lord or something.
Yeah.
Like I'd want some like lore creativity, some canon type creativity, but hopefully his name isn't Coden Bond. That would be awkward.
It is interesting you bring up like kind of like an anagram, because Darth Revan's son in the Revan novel was named Avner, which is an anagram of Revan. I'm like, maybe they could name him Avner, but I don't know. Does that sound like a name that a janitor would have?
I mean, because if they went with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are great examples. Like if they went with a name like that, then we're like, oh, he's Force sensitive, he's a Jedi, and then...
But I mean, a lot of characters like Admiral Dodonna, like there's no Dodonnas, where I am at. Like, I would rather have a made-up name, because if anything, I feel like if you have a real name like Luke Skywalker, it's kind of like, well, he's the hero, But I think if, like, you were to have someone named, like, random name off the top of my head, Garrett Special Hero, I think that would be a bit much, So.
Yeah, it's like first name, like especially I would want to kind of have it mix in, kind of have you're saying like an anagram with the Star Wars universe, but I don't think it has to relate to Revan. It just, I would just want it to not be Jeff, No offense to all those Jeffs out there.
So, I mean, we kind of covered the Endar Spire prologue tutorial in episode 6. You learn the D&D style of combat there. You learn to basically do everything you can in the game other than riding a swoop or playing Pazak or being a Jedi. But if this is the first time listening to us, we suggest that you don't bother with blasters. Just upgrade your melee combat skills, because you're not going to need a blaster when you move on to the lightsaber,
Just endure that, your blaster accuracy like those rebels at the beginning of Star Wars A New Hope, where you shoot the walls more than you shoot the stormtroopers. But go find that vibroblade as fast as you can, and then you'll be successful.
But yeah, how KOTOR opens, it's like a long time ago, boom, and then you have that title crawl. The Endar Spire is under attack. Your character wakes up, and Trask Olgo, no one knows who the voice actor is, but whoever was the voice actor, I wonder what direction he was given, because he has no inside voice whatsoever. Everything he says is just urgent, like, we have to save Bastila and got to get to Karth, and it's like, oh, whoa, take it down. Like, I'm like, did Trask Olgo have all the caffeine? Just barely, so it would be funny to play with. So yeah, you learn the skills, Trask dies and saves you from Darth Bandon, and then you meet Carth Onasi, and you exit on the last escape pod, and then you crash land on Terrace. Oh, and also, Carth Onasi, he is voiced by Raphael Sbarge, who is from Once Upon a Time and from the Mass Effect series. Got that BioWare connection. But how I would start a film is one thing that kind of sets apart the KOTOR beginning is it's not a pursued ship, it's more like a sinking ship. And I wouldn't start with a Revan who's asleep and wakes up. I think that's kind of just done too much. Like, realistically, if a ship is in space and it's under attack and sinking, like, I don't think he would just be waking up. So how I would start it out is maybe just like Revan and Trask are running around, and the mission is like, okay, we gotta save the Jedi on board Bastila, and we have to find Carth too and make sure we get off, you know? But yeah, speaking of Trask Ulgo in game, who would you cast as Trask Ulgo in a movie?
Stephen Lang. I pulled him from the example of the James Cameron Avatar, of just kind of like that over the top military, dramatic military guy. I could see something like that.
Yeah, I think he would be a little bit older than the character would be in the video game, but that could be interesting to kind of have some age, because Carth and Revan are kind of similar ages.
I mean, Disney's no stranger to CGI. I'm sure they'd figure something out.
My fan cast would be Leslie Odom Jr., because Trask is going to die, and I think you would want to have an actor who would be kind of different and leave an impression when he dies. I mean, originally Poe Dameron was going to die in the prologue to The Force Awakens, but then they kept him on, and I kind of think, like, that character would be more interesting if he died, you know, in 7. So I kind of think it would be, you could kind of have fun with it, cast someone who you typically wouldn't cast, you know, in a Star Wars film, and I think that Leslie Odom Jr., he was great in Hamilton and Murder on the Orient Express, so I just think he could be fun, be different, and leave an impression.
So another thought that I had is like J.K. Simmons. He'd be another one that's kind of an older casting, but again, that's something that Disney could easily fix. But like, just like super loud, over the top, bring me pictures of Spider-Man. Like, hey, the ship's going down, we need to evacuate.
And I mean, they could honestly just have an older actor,
Yeah.
which I'm fine with too. Like, I think like CGI, like de-aging characters, like, you only use that, like, when you really need it, like with Princess Leia or bringing Tarkin back to life, you know? So, J.K. Simmons could be good, too. So, just a few quick fan casts. Astronautica said Chris Hemsworth, which would be interesting because Chris Hemsworth kind of came onto the scene in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek reboot, and he was famous for dying in a prologue in space. So maybe he could bring it full circle. What do you think about that one?
I think Chris Hemsworth is awesome, but I always hesitate to. It's like when Game of Thrones actors get cast in roles. It's like, oh, they're only bringing them in because of how popular they are. And like, if I saw Chris Hemsworth in Star Wars, I don't know. I think I'd want him in a role that isn't just going to be like the first 10 minutes.
Yeah. And Chris Hemsworth is kind of like a natural comedian, so if he were to be in a role, I would kind of want more humor. And I don't think there's much humor in we're gonna die unless we get to the escape pod, you know?
And now if he voices the robot...
HK-47?
Yeah, if he voices HK-47, there we go.
That could work. That could be funny. And then Mysteries of the Force says maybe Daniel Weber. He was in The Punisher. I saw a bit of that series. I didn't watch it all the way through, but he definitely looks the part, and he's a good actor. I'm not as familiar, but what do you think?
Maybe a little dark, but that's, I mean, maybe. I think it'll work. I don't know a ton about Daniel Weber. It's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And then the Order of the Jedi suggested Brad Pitt, and I think this would be a little bit below his pay grade. But what do you think?
I'd say the same about Chris Hemsworth. I think if Disney were to pull a name like Brad Pitt or Chris Hemsworth, they're gonna be a bit more committed than 10 minutes.
And then Ironic.design says Justin Hartley, and I grew up watching Smallville. He does look the part and could act the part. I just wonder if he's a little bit too TV, but I mean, that wouldn't really matter because it's just the first maybe potentially 5 to 15 minutes at most. But what do you think?
I don't recognize Justin Hartley at all.
Okay. But do you think like in a KOTOR movie or adaptation, would it be interesting for you to maybe see Trask, Karth, and Revan kind of teaming up being a trio, and they're about to all get into the escape pod, but then Darth Bandon appears, and maybe Trask is in on the secret, and that could be revealed like later in a third movie, and like Trask is kind of just selfless, and maybe he's like, you guys go, I'm gonna stop him, and they're like, no, that means you're gonna die, and they kind of became like a little bit of buddies, like friendship forged in fire, and then you kind of just like see Trask kind of sacrifice himself, so then the amnesiac Revan and Karth can crash land on Terrace. Like, what do you think about that?
So I think I'd want a lot of the focus being the space combat at the beginning of the movie. I would say that because so much of the Revan story at the beginning involves so much tutorial and just even the plot is very tutorially, I'd probably want to see less of that and maybe more Bastila and then some Karth that kind of gives us glimpses of Revan towards the end of the space combat, and then just kind of have the movie officially start when they crash the escape pod down on Terrace.
Yeah,
Well,
because
I don't think it's a bad idea to introduce other characters besides the main character right off the bat. I mean, A New Hope does that where we don't even meet
yeah,
Luke until several minutes into the movie because we're busy watching the Star Destroyer take on the Tantive 4 and Leia giving the plans to R2D2 and
yeah.
crash landing on
What I was
Tatooine, and then
gonna,
we meet Luke. And
yeah,
so I think that, I mean, Revan is involved in the beginning sequence, but I don't think it wouldn't be as exciting to me if we spent the bulk of the opening following Revan's path to the escape pod.
yeah. Like, what if they did the whole Attack of the Clones beginning where you think you're following Padme, but it's actually a decoy, and you kind of just see her over the shoulder? What if they did that with Bastila, and then you kind of don't quite see Bastila until you're on Terrace, but you kind of just kind of keep her involved, like maybe to the extent that Princess Leia is, or maybe a little bit less, kind of keep it a little bit of a mystery. So when you meet her, it's kind of like, oh, kind of different than I was expecting, you know? But maybe like the beginning could be like, I mean, like Revan would probably be the main character, you know? So at least kind of establishing where he is, like during the bombardment of the Amdar Spire. Because at this point, it's kind of more, it's pretty much about to blow up rather than being pursued. So, like, it would be cool just to kind of see, like, maybe the trio escape, and then kind of seeing what's happening outside as well, to kind of, like, be like, yeah, it's Star Wars, there's space, and things blow up in space, you know? But kind of like Karth, Revan, and Bastila are going to be your main three, so you want to introduce them kind of in a major way. And in A New Hope, like, I don't think that Han Solo is on screen until 45 minutes in, so maybe they could do that with Bastila later. But I think, like, with the point of this is, like, you want to begin with a bang, kind of throw the audience into it, and get to Terrace as soon as possible. A big question mark in an adaptation or a film or whatever they have is, how much Terrace do you want to show? Would that be the bulk of maybe a first movie or a first season, or would it just be a chunk and maybe the last part is Dantooine or one of the quest planets? But
I think for me, I don't think I would mind, say if they were breaking up into like 3 films. If we spent about as much time as we spent on Tatooine and the Phantom Menace, or even Tatooine and A New Hope, I think there's a lot of things that can be done while the cast is at Terrace. In kind of my perspective, playing the game, we have Bastila, who has captured important cargo, which is Revan, and then when they crash onto Terrace, Karth is stuck with essentially the villain, and so he's trying to find his captain, Bastila, and because it was kind of like her errand to have Revan in the first place, and so I think if we kept it to a pretty like action heavy opening, like the majority of the Star Wars films, and then kind of let Terrace kind of house some of the exposition of KOTOR. So while Karth and Revan are looking for Bastila, we can learn a little bit about just the characters, the personality of Revan and the personality of Karth. Just meet and learn the characters as they're trudging through Terrace to find Bastila, and then just take off from there.
I mean, we're definitely going to discuss Terrace a bit more in the future, but I think Terrace is important, but I think it can be streamlined. I don't think we need to go into every facet of Terrace in a movie.
There's a lot of character development that Terrace can take advantage of,
Yeah.
and instead of turning to Karth, who actually has nothing to say to you because he changes his mind over and over and over again,
Yeah. He'd
you
be a
can
bad boyfriend.
yeah, you can have like actual dialogue and interactions with the the citizens of Terrace as you're investigating the crash escape pod, looking for Bastila, and kind of use that to introduce the viewer to the main cast of KOTOR.
Yeah. Because I think it's like every first installment of a trilogy is kind of like a little bit of a hero's journey. So I think you would kind of have to follow through some of those. But when you leave Terrace, it's because it's kind of being destroyed, bombarded by Darth Malak's fleet. So you kind of leave on a little bit of like a tragic note. So I don't think you could quite leave in the first movie. Like the end of the first movie shouldn't be escaping Terrace. I think it should maybe be a midpoint, but we'll definitely kind of explore Terrace more in a future episode.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, just a final thought. It's similar to Jeddah in Rogue One, where you do spend a good chunk of time on Jeddah because that's where the pilot is. You're trying to find him so you can find
Galen or so.
yeah, Galen Erso. That's the name I'm looking for. But there's this urgency because you as a viewer, I mean, there's a Star Destroyer that's looming overhead, and usually that means that there's going to be an orbital bombardment at some point. But then you also have the Death Star that's having its political plot being played out, and that ends up being used to provide the bombardment that you're anticipating. And so I think the Sith destroyer looming over Terrace provides kind of that needed urgency and anticipation of the main cast looming the streets of Terrace.
Yeah.
But yeah, to
Yeah,
spend the
'cause
whole movie there isn't necessary.
it could be a little bit like the Death Star. Like you have to escape Terrace, and it kind of like has that tension like, oh, we're kind of surrounded here. So maybe like about a similar amount of time as the Death Star in A New Hope. That could be interesting. Because I think the first movie would be hardest to crack, in my opinion. But
Yeah, I mean that's what sets the tone for the whole trilogy. And I mean, if you get the first film wrong, then the other two are going to be wrong too. All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. So this has been Coden.
this has been Cassia, And you can find us on Instagram at the Ebon Hawk Podcast. And our podcast, The Ebon Hawk, can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, and everywhere else that Anchor podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out. And our email is ebonhawkpodcast@gmail.com. And you can email us your questions or inquiries there.
And then you can find me on Twitch and Instagram. Just on either of those platforms, just search Code and Bond. You'll find me. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman, and he can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/Alistair Sounds. Our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com. This has been episode 30 of The Ebon Hawk. May the force be with you. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.